I'll do it on the computer. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the debate project presented by No Weapon Productions. I'm so excited to have our debaters on camera with us today. First, we have Karima, who is coming to us from California, and Zora, who is coming to us from Washington, D.C. Today's debate topics. We have two, we've got a double feature. But for today, what we are going to see is this topic. When do a child's rights begin? During pregnancy or at the beginning of pregnancy, which is the point that Karima will be arguing, or after the child's birth, which is the point that Zora will be arguing. So first, we're going to have Karima make her points, and next, Zora will make her points. So I will turn it over now to Karima.
Hi. Okay, so basically it does start during pregnancy. I feel like, you know, once a child is viable, which is after 22 weeks, then it's a baby. It's a life, and they have every right to be alive and have, you know, the potential to be born and be a potential human just because they were created. I mean, none of us who are living would want to have been, you know, had our life taken before we were even able to start it, you know? So one of my main things is that it's mainly like an awe type vibe that I see happening. Like, people who are more pro-life have the idea where a child's life is when they're viable and when they can see them moving on an ultrasound and can see them wave and smile and maybe even, you know, turn and kick. And that's something that a regular human would be able to do outside of the womb. So why are they not a person inside? Another point is that there's a type of procedure in utero that people can do for different reasons, for different birth defects like spina bifida, or it's just certain things that would affect a child when they are born and they can't live outside without emergency surgery. But why not have them have that procedure while they're in the womb, and then they get to heal in the most healing environment, and then are born, and it's just, they get to live life as regular. And it just makes sense because as a regular adult human, if we needed surgery for something that was affecting our life, we would get it because we're alive. Life we're saving, and so is a child's that is in utero. I also think that this quote from a Science Direct article, where it says, "A pregnant woman thus assumes the same duty of care towards the fetus as she would toward any stranger, a duty to refrain causing harm." That's also something that doctors have to make an oath to do no harm, as someone who is pregnant should also make that oath to do no harm to their own child, essentially. Also, in accordance to the Science Direct, it states that the court stated that in the interest in potential human life has to be measured against the woman's right to privacy, and that the fetus at a certain point in development acquires the potentiality for personhood and therefore the right to protection. So their own life, you know, although they cannot speak for themselves, it's important that someone else is their advocate. But all in all, it's a very ethically framed debate. It's about people's morals, and it just depends on, you know, what your morals are and what you believe is correct in your own sense. I'm arguing that it should be considered a life even at 18 weeks in utero, 22 weeks. It's, you know, once their heart starts beating, then it's no longer just a clump of cells. It's a person living, breathing, I mean, not breathing, but living, and they have a heartbeat. So yeah, that's my argument.
Thank you, Karima. Thank you, Karima. Zora, it is now your turn to make your argument about your view and or the side that you're arguing, whether it's your view or not, that life begins, a child's rights begin after birth. Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay, you may begin.
Awesome. So I personally believe that abortion should be legal, and that I believe that rights for a child does start once a child is born. The reason being because there are a lot of factors at play. One being unwanted pregnancies. There are a lot of pregnancies that are conceived through rape, through sexual assault and abuse, and especially among low-income women. According to gutmache.org, there are women less than 200% of the federal poverty line that are typically the ones who become pregnant, and especially the ones who become unwanted pregnant. And around 32,101 women get pregnant through sexual assault each year, according to Holmes. So I think although it's a great thing for children to be born, and like it's always a great thing to introduce children to the world and stuff like that, I think a huge factor is that not everyone has like the same situation, whether that be financially or socially or economically. Another factor is that some mothers aren't financially capable of being able to raise a child. And you have to think about like the likelihood of children being put into foster homes and like being put into like any abusive household or family and stuff like that, because that is a very big issue, especially in today's society where we have parents like millennial parents who have a very low income, who aren't like, they might bring a child into this world, but they make significantly less than other generations, and they're not able to give a child the same life and the same, you know, rights that a child born somewhere else would be. I think the last point I really want to make on this is that I think women deserve the right to their body regardless. I think that just making all abortion illegal, giving a child rights before it's born is very disrespectful to like a lot of women around the world who have very different issues. I don't think it's like a one size fits all kind of law. I believe that women come from different backgrounds, different privileges, and different struggles. Some families have more like financially stable and like positive household environments, while others may not have that luxury. And having a baby can be extremely life-threatening to some women if they are without access to like contraceptive pills or like abortions. So when you think about like people who are born, whether it be into low income or high income or just circumstance through life, I think that one woman's gift of a baby might be another woman's nightmare, you know, because there's such different scenarios. And I think I don't think a child should have rights before it's born, but I also think that they should only be born if the woman wants the baby, because you don't want a mom that doesn't want a baby. Then the baby knows that the mama didn't want the baby, and it turns into a whole another issue. And B, the woman is financially and physically capable of bringing another human into the world. So, you know.
Thank you, Zora, for your opposing view. Karima, are you ready to provide any rebuttal? Do you have a rebuttal that you'd like to make, or any additional points you'd like to make to Zora's comments?
I don't.
You don't?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, and Zora, do you have any comments that you'd like to make about anything that Karima shared?
No, all right.
Okay, so I have a couple of questions. Do you think, and this question goes out to both of you, do you think that that the financial, not being able to financially care for a child should weigh into whether or not you're allowed to have an abortion?
Absolutely. there's too much of an economic draw between the lower class and the middle class and higher class. You know, people that are in the low class, you know, they honestly can't afford to have children, and they're the people that I see with the most children of all. And it, you know, I see their children struggling. Some of my neighbors, you know, I see them struggling to take care of their 5 kids in a 2-bedroom home because that's all they can afford. And no child should have to go through that. No person should have to deal with the trauma and have to deal with that later in life when they're 18, 20, even into their 50s sometimes, that it stays with them, you know, like not being wanted or loved or being, you know, abandoned essentially, even though you're living in the same household. Sometimes it can have that effect on people.
In that situation, though, and Zora, I want to hear from you as well, but in that situation, do you think that was an issue of not having access to medical care to get an abortion, or do you think it was by choice to keep the children? Karima.
I think it was both. For some people, I don't want to, you know, assume their beliefs or their religion, but because of their race, but in some cultures, they usually believe in Catholicism or Christianity. And in those certain cases, most people in those churches don't believe in abortions or contraceptives at all. So, you know, if you're using contraceptive, then it's against God's law and you're not going to go to heaven, or you're not going to do X, Y, and Z because you're not good enough because you didn't follow his law on earth. But I don't see it written anywhere. So, you know, it's just based on a man's idea of what people should do.
And Zora, I'm going to come to you with a question in a moment, but I do have a follow-up question for you, Karima. Do you feel like people who are low income shouldn't be allowed to have children?
I don't think they should have as many. I feel like if, you know, it's your duty to have, to be a mother or a parent or a father, you know, if you feel it's your duty to do that, then go for it. But I feel like someone like that should take into consideration what effects it could have on the child, not just their individual happiness.
You know, there are countries where they regulate how many children a family is allowed to have.
Yeah.
And does that seem correct to you?
Yes, absolutely. I know that happens in Asia, where they actually are forced to kill the child if they become pregnant again. And, you know, it's unfortunate, but I feel like sometimes it should be a regulation.
Okay. And Zora, for you, my question is this. You argued about a child's rights and when they should be viable, that the mother's rights should supersede the child's rights until the child is born. Does that concept coincide with when you believe life begins, or is it irrespective of when you think life begins? Do you think life doesn't begin until after the child is born, or are you just talking solely about a child's rights compared to mother's rights?
I think that life definitely begins when the child is born, point blank period. I think that, of course, we know like the development, like the science behind how a baby is born and like all that kind of stuff. But I don't think the child isn't able to make any decisions for itself until it's born. So I think that we should take into account, before the child is born, we should take into account the woman's rights who's giving the baby first, or who's birthing the baby first.
But in terms of a child not having any ability to speak for itself in terms of its rights, there are handicapped people who are adults or children who can't speak for themselves. There might be people who are, deaf or blind and or unable to speak for whatever reason. Should they not have rights if they're already born? I mean, if being able to speak for themselves and speak for their rights is the deciding factor, then what about a person who doesn't have that ability due to handicap?
I think that point is different, because I think right now we're talking more about like the child being born, and like right when the baby is born, that's when it's given rights. So I think after the baby's born, it has rights and stuff like that. But I'm more talking about when the baby's in the womb. And like in terms of like handicap and like all of those kind of different things, they definitely should have rights, like without a doubt. What the heck? Like they definitely should. But right now I'm more talking about right when the baby is born, should we give rights to a baby that's not born yet? And to that I say no.
Should that decision solely rest with the mother?
Yes, at the end of the day, because I know a lot of people come from different situations where like the father feels like it's his duty to say whether or not the woman should have the baby or something. But at the end of the day, it is the woman's body to begin with. And like, I think at the end of the day, she should be the one to make the ultimate decision.
Karima, do you agree with that?
I do. You know, a man is a part of it, but, you know, they perform a basic biological human function, and then a woman is what has to do all the work for the next 9 months. And then sometimes after that, because the man loses interest. And it's really unfortunate that they feel that they can make a choice to just leave or not have responsibility for something that is their own. And I think a woman should be able to have that choice and that right. If they wanted to deal with the partnership and the partnership is no longer there, they have every right to not have to do it.
What if it's the woman's husband and the woman's husband was truly looking forward to having a child, finds out that he's going to have a son, and then they get into an argument? It's the woman's right to choose. She decides to abort the baby, doing it intentionally to hurt the husband. Should that be allowed? Should the husband have a say?
If it's intentional, then that's just up to personal and moral background. It has nothing to do with the rights of a child. It's, you know, it's between two people. There's only two people until that child is out of the womb. I mean, it's between those two people. And if they got married with the knowledge of he wants a kid and she doesn't, then that's where it started. They didn't have to get married. They didn't have to keep going just because they love each other so much. If their beliefs are that strongly apart, especially when it comes to children, it should have never happened in the first place. I mean, on Grey's Anatomy, Christina and Owen, Christina and Burke, you know, she didn't want kids and they wanted it, and she was like, no, and then they divorced and cheating and, you know, the whole situation. I was like, okay, y'all could have fixed that way before, you know, and just not have gotten married.
Do you agree with Zora, Karima, that, I see your hand, Zora, I'll come to you next. Do you agree with Zora that life begins after birth, or do you think life begins in the womb?
For me personally, I believe that life begins in the womb. If I'm pregnant and I have a child, you know, that is a life that's in there. That's my kid. I'm gonna fight for their life until they're out of that womb. But that's just my personal choice. I would never personally have an abortion. I would never personally make sure that I couldn't have the child if I was in a loving, committed relationship and we both had agreed. But in other people's cases, that's up to them. It's all a personal and moral choice. It has nothing to do with every other person. Like, no one should be inside another person's uterus. Like, it's yours and it's yours.
Zora, what did you want to add?
Exactly that. I think that it's completely up to whoever is giving the baby to decide what their choice is. I don't think that, similar to the example you gave where the woman had an abortion to get back at the husband, that reason isn't enough to say all abortions should be legal. You know what I mean? Because it's like there are women who are impregnated through unwanted pregnancies, like I was saying, and stuff like that. And I think that like some cases of like, oh, well, she did this to get back at her husband, or she did this, but there's like, okay, but this woman's like out here that just got sexually assaulted at like 13 years old, and now she's giving birth at 13. It's like, okay. So I think just a couple of cases that are like crazy extreme, like what the heck, aren't enough to like ban all abortions. You know what I mean? So
I do.
I'm pretty much the same with Karima. Like, keep out of another person's uterus, you know?
Do you think that abortions should be used as a form of birth control, Zora? Not just in cases of rape. Just, you know, I was with my boyfriend, we love each other, oops, I got pregnant, that's okay, I can just have an abortion.
Okay, with this one, I would say Not necessarily, just because we do in this day and age have so many other actual birth control methods, such as birth control and Plan B. And I think that is personally more easily accessible, just because like knowing people in my personal life who do have had like, you know, sexual relations with like their counterparts or like their others and stuff like that. But they haven't had to go like the full step. If they found out they, you know, like something happened that they didn't want to happen, then they'll like, oh, let me just get a Plan B, or like, let me just get birth control and like stay on it. So I don't, in that case, I think abortion should be used as like a case by case basis, definitely. But I don't think birth control, like just birth control in general.
No, I agree. Now, you know, by the time a baby gets to a certain development stage in the womb, let's say 7 months, 8 months, really anything after 5 months, like Karima shared, 20 weeks, 22 weeks, it's like a whole baby. So after 22 weeks, certainly after, let's say 26 weeks, then 28 weeks, somewhere in there, that's about 7 months old, a baby can live from that point. Do you think that abortion should be allowed after the point when a baby could live on its own if allowed to be born at that point?
I think it really depends on the case. I think that depending on the mother, if the mother wants to go forward with the birth, then sure, go ahead. But when it comes to the other cases of like sexual assault, when it comes to like teen pregnancies that are unwanted, I think that if like, since we know that, I think that a kid that just, you know, is having a kid, or someone who got sexually assaulted should just do what they feel comfortable with. Because what would happen if that baby was born and the person couldn't take care of it, and they ended up going into like the orphanage or like the foster care system, and they're put with a family that's much worse or something like that. There are so many different scenarios where I feel that it's really up to the person who's giving the baby's job to define that, you know?
Even at that late term, there's a lot of debate and a lot of conversation about late term pregnancies. Even at that point, 7 to 9 months, if they say, I don't think I can do it, they should be allowed to abort the baby, in your opinion, Zora?
Yeah, and I think it just depends on the woman.
Karima?
So in the case to case, I'm the same way. It's just case to case. If you can't handle it, then you can't handle it. But in this one particular case, when I was in high school, my English teacher knew someone that they were married, and the wife was pregnant, and at 7 months they noticed on the ultrasound that the child's brain was outside of its body, and the same thing with the sac of organs outside of its body. And you know, with heavy debate of, is it worth it? Should I do in utero surgery? Should I do should I have an abortion? Should I just have a stillbirth? You know, whatever else. But then it came down at 8 months. They were debating it for a month. They came down to 8 months, and they said, you know, if you push this child out of your body, you'll go into septic shock. If you have, you know, a cesarean section, it's very easy to have a placental abruption. You know, if the baby gets too big and the brain is over here and the head's here and the organs are here and the body's here. In that case, they were literally forced to go have an abortion because, you know, it's either she dies or both of them die. You know, it was just a case by case thing. And it's so rare that happens. But, you know, in that case, it's like my life is on the line for a child that wouldn't even be able to live outside of my womb. And, you know, my husband doesn't want to lose me. My family doesn't want to lose me. I'm not ready to go. So why would I subject myself to being forced to stillbirth and have the possibility of losing my life just because, you know, there's a life? I mean, it's not a life at that point.
And in that situation, when it's a matter of medical emergency that the child won't survive or the mother potentially won't survive, I think that's one set of arguments. And I think I was asking, let's say, you know, I'm 8 months pregnant and I decide, I just don't know if I can handle having a baby right now. Can you just go ahead and abort it? But I mean, the baby's a viable baby at that point. Still my choice because I'm the mother and it's my uterus.
Yeah, it's situation by situation. If someone doesn't want to have a kid, then they don't want to have it, and that's just that.
Even if they get all the way right to that 9-month period, just before it comes out, go
If
ahead
they
and
can
inject
handle
it.
it, if they can handle doing that, then they can handle doing that. And if that's their choice, then that's their choice. And if they regret it down the line, then that's something they have to work out personally. But at the time, if they can't handle it, then they can't handle it.
Zora, do you agree?
I agree. I think also that's like exactly the point. Like it's very case by case, like in general. And I also think I think we should care about the children, because I think this argument can kind of be mistaken for like not caring about kids in their lives. But I think we're caring about kids' lives more with those kind of cases where it's like kids who, or where it's mothers who are like, I just don't want to have a kid anymore. Like if that kid is born, then who knows what that mother can put the kid through, like mentally, emotionally, physically, things like that. Because if she didn't want to have him in the first place, or her in the first place, or them in the first place, it could turn into a whole bunch of other issues that would kind of damage the child in the long run, so.
Okay, that's quite, it's an in-depth topic, and one that, as you both mentioned, is very, very personal. As you both reiterated, the desire for people to stay out of women's uteruses. I understand what you're saying, and that seems to be strong. It sounds as though, in this case, Karima, is it true that you were arguing a point that you didn't necessarily agree with, but argued the pro because that was what was selected? Or did you agree with it?
Sort of. So for me personally, I agree with it, but it's really just person to person. I wouldn't personally do something like that myself, but if the next girl wants to, then that's their choice. It's just that I have a different moral standing, but it is a life in my personal choice, but it's not, my general idea. It's in my personal idea, it is, but in general of other women and other people that feel the need to get one, then that's your choice. It's just really choice by choice. It's all a personal decision. It should be heavily meditated. It has nothing to do with anyone else. No one else should be a part of that decision for you unless, you're married or, there's some different case about it. But in that case, no, I wasn't really arguing my side, and like a halfway arguing my side.
Zora, do you have any final thoughts?
I mean, I just completely wholeheartedly agree with Karima on that. Like, I definitely want kids myself personally, but I do know people in my personal life, in high school and middle school even, who did have a pregnancy or an unwanted pregnancy or things like that. And they had to really sit with it for a really long time. So I think it's very important that we don't just make a law that's banning all abortion, like just banning everything, because then we're like disregarding women who are physically or like financially incapable of being able to give birth to babies. So it's like,
Okay. Thank you, brilliant young adults, Karima and Zora. I appreciate you sharing your views and arguing both sides and giving really thorough arguments on either side and about the issue just in general. So thank you so much for participating in the debate project.